The rain fell gently upon the expansive green fields of Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, a location where silence held the depth of innumerable untold tales. David Whitman, a man in his late 50s, emerged from his sleek black sedan, the sound of his polished shoes crunching against the damp gravel as he approached a well-known gravestone. Each year, on this very date, October 12th, he returned to pay tribute to the memory of the one woman who had captured his heart completely. His hands, firm yet weathered by the years, held a bouquet of white lilies, Elena's cherished choice. Each trip to this grave served as a poignant reminder of his losses, of the choices that had molded his life into the solitary reality it now was. David was a figure of influence and affluence, a real estate magnate who had constructed an empire from the very foundation. His name resonated throughout New York City, gracing headlines, business publications, and dominating towering billboards that showcased his latest luxury apartment ventures. He possessed all that one could wish for: wealth, power, and a way of life that sparked envy in countless hearts. In these serene moments at the cemetery, everything else faded away. In this moment, he was stripped of his ruthless persona, devoid of the calculating mind of an investor. Instead, he stood as a grieving man, one who had once cherished a love so profound that not even the passage of time could diminish its essence. Elena was the sole gentle presence in his toughened existence. They had crossed paths many years earlier when he was a youthful dreamer striving to carve out his place in Manhattan. She had toiled at a quaint art gallery in Soho, her eyes perpetually brimming with aspirations and her heart ever poised to embrace love. In contrast to David's relentless pursuit of ambition, Elena cherished the small, beautiful moments that infused life with meaning. She would pull him to parks, insist on long strolls across the Brooklyn Bridge, and remind him that existence encompassed more than mere figures and transactions. She was his guiding star, his anchor, until the moment she disappeared from his world, leaving no sign behind. David had been on a quest to find her. He had exhausted every connection, every resource, yet Elena had vanished like a fleeting whisper in the breeze. For years, he pondered the reasons behind her departure, questioning if his actions had driven her away. The inquiries had followed him, hovering like specters in the shadows of his thoughts. 5 years ago, he discovered her resting place in this cemetery. Not in life, but in death. He arrived too late, only to discover that she had succumbed to an illness, leaving behind a void of explanation and no sense of closure. Merely a name carved into a headstone. He knelt before her grave, the rain drenching his coat as he laid the lilies softly on the earth. "It has been 5 years, Elena," he murmured, his voice soft and nearly drowned out by the whispering leaves, "and I still find myself without the answers." His fingers glided over the frigid stone, the inscription of her name resonating like a scar that would remain forever unhealed. He shut his eyes, allowing the memories to wash over him, her laughter, her fragrance, the way she had filled his world with warmth. A swift motion in the far-off landscape drew his gaze. He had company. A young man, likely in his early 20s, lingered a few feet away, his hands tucked into the pockets of his weathered leather jacket. His hair was dark, curling gently at the edges, and his lean frame hinted at a life of struggle rather than one of ease. His expression was inscrutable, a blend of sorrow and uncertainty, as he gazed at the same grave where David knelt. David scowled. He had never witnessed another soul pay their respects at Elena's grave. He believed she was alone, with no family remaining to recall her existence. However, this young man was not merely a passerby. His gaze upon the grave held a profound intimacy, a connection that felt intensely personal. David gradually stood up, his keen gaze examining the unfamiliar figure. "Were you acquainted with her?" he inquired, his tone unwavering yet brimming with intrigue. The young man paused, fidgeting slightly as if weighing his response. After a lengthy silence, he finally spoke, his voice gravelly yet imbued with an odd sense of familiarity. "She was my mother." David's heart came to a sudden halt. For a fleeting instant, the surroundings dissolved into a soft blur, the rain, the trees, the gravestones all melted away into a gentle haze. He gazed at the boy, seeking any indication that this wasn't merely a cruel jest of fate. "Could you repeat that?" His voice hovered just above a whisper. The young man let out a sharp breath, running his fingers through his wet hair. "Elena Whitman was my mother," he reiterated, his eyes fixed intently on David's. "If what she said holds any truth, then you are indeed my father." David sensed a tremor beneath his feet, as though the very soil had split apart. The words surged around him like a powerful tide, obliterating every belief he had ever clung to. He was blessed with a son. A child he was unaware of all along. A son that Elena had hidden from him all these years. His breath came in shallow gasps, his mind racing with a myriad of questions, yet only one found its way to his lips. "Why didn't she share that with me?" The young man, his son, offered a wry smile, one that carried the weight of unspoken suffering. "Text, I suppose that's a puzzle you'll need to solve," he remarked. Without uttering another word, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the misty rain, leaving David standing alone before Elena's grave, feeling more lost than he had ever felt in his entire life. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. David remained motionless, the patter of the rain becoming a faint echo in the background. The young man's words lingered in his thoughts, each syllable piercing him like a sharp blade. "She was my mother. You are my dad." He struggled to comprehend the truth of it, yet it seemed elusive, like a dream fading away from his grasp. Before him stood his son, his own flesh and blood, yet he chose to turn away. His legs wobbled beneath him as he extended a shaky hand, seeking solace on Elena's gravestone. What had prompted her to conceal this from him? Why had she allowed him to go on for all these years, under the impression that she had vanished without explanation? His breath came in shallow gasps as he turned, searching the cemetery for any trace of the young man. Yet he had vanished, swallowed by the shadows of the trees and the gray mist enveloping Brooklyn. After a long time, David experienced an emotion he had long suppressed, panic. He had dedicated his existence to mastering every aspect of his surroundings, making certain that nothing ever took him by surprise. Yet here he stood in the rain, utterly powerless. He needed to track him down. He couldn't simply allow him to vanish. He sought clarity. He hurriedly approached the cemetery's entrance, his gaze flitting from one side to the other, desperately seeking any trace of the boy. Upon reaching the main road, his heart raced at the sight of a solitary figure trudging away, shoulders drawn tight against the chill. Without a moment's hesitation, David shouted, his voice piercing the quiet of the evening. "Hold on." The young man halted his steps, yet he refrained from looking back. David inhaled deeply, his heart pounding as he approached her. Upon reaching him, he paused, uncertain of how to express himself. "Kindly, stay with me. I simply require clarity." The young man pivoted with deliberation, his deep-set eyes concealing any hint of emotion. As David drew nearer, he noticed the subtle similarities, a hint in the contour of the jaw, the intensity of the gaze. It disturbed him in a manner he had not anticipated. The boy, however, appeared unfazed. "Comprehend what?" His voice held a subtle bitterness. "That you were completely unaware of my presence? That my mother single-handedly nurtured me while you were busy constructing your empire?" David recoiled. He had always taken pride in confronting reality directly, yet this was a reality he was not ready to encounter. "I promise you, I had no clue," he said, his voice trembling with feeling. She kept it to herself. He examined the boy's expression for any hint of belief, yet all he found was a veil of cautious doubt. "May I ask what your name is?" David inquired, coming to the unsettling realization that he was unaware of even the simplest details regarding his own son. "Stop." With a hint of hesitation, the boy finally replied, "Nathan." Nathan. The name resonated with an odd sense of familiarity, as though it had lingered in a concealed corner of his spirit throughout the years. David forced down the tightness in his throat. Nathan. I'm puzzled as to why Elena chose not to share that with me. I'm uncertain about her reasons for keeping you away from me, but I must find out. Kindly share some details about her. Nathan released a humorless chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. Are you asking me to share details about her? He inquired with a sharp edge of resentment. Where were you during her time of illness? During her difficult times with rent payments? When she toiled through double shifts just to keep us above water? Can you imagine the countless nights she spent in tears, questioning whether her choice was the right one? David experienced a gut-wrenching sensation, as though he had been struck hard in the abdomen. He had devoted years to grieving for Elena, convinced she had made the choice to abandon him, never realizing the depth of her suffering. The idea of her battling through hardships while he resided in luxurious penthouses and inked multi-million-dollar contracts churned his stomach with unease. I had no idea, he murmured, his voice scarcely audible. If I had, I would have. Nathan interrupted him. What would you have? Arrived like a savior and solved all the problems with your wealth? His eyes blazed with fury. That distinguishes us. You believe that wealth can fix all problems. However, she had no use for your money. She required your presence. You simply weren't present. David sensed the heaviness of those words sink profoundly into his heart. He stood exposed, without a shield or rationale. It was the stark truth that he had let Elena down without even realizing it. You're correct, he conceded, his voice raspy. I was not present. And that is beyond my control. However, I desire to understand you, Nathan. If there's even the slightest opportunity to set things straight, I'll seize it. Nathan fixed his gaze on him, contemplating for an extended moment, weighing the truth of his words. With a heavy sigh, he turned his gaze elsewhere. It's already too late, he whispered softly. She has departed. And you remain an unfamiliar face. He pivoted and strolled off, vanishing into the city's infinite avenues. David remained still, his gaze fixed on his son as he disappeared into the darkness, a profound sense of disorientation enveloping him like never before. David perched in his penthouse on Fifth Avenue, gazing at the city lights that sprawled endlessly beyond the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. New York had always been his realm, a space where he flourished, where each transaction, every towering structure, and every monetary victory had become yet another accolade in his array of achievements. Yet this evening, the city exuded a chill, an air of strangeness. His reflection in the glass appeared as that of an unfamiliar figure, a man possessing everything yet feeling utterly empty. Nathan's words reverberated in his thoughts, each one slicing deeper than the previous. She had no use for your money. She required your presence. For years, he had been convinced that Elena had left him behind, unaware that she was nurturing their son in solitude, enduring hardships beyond his comprehension. The image of her toiling through double shifts, barely making ends meet for rent, while he focused on constructing his empire, churned his stomach with unease. How could he have been unaware? How had he never sensed in his very being that a piece of him had existed out there, maturing without his presence? His thoughts surged back to the cemetery, to that instant when he first laid eyes on Nathan. He was already certain without the need for a DNA test. It was evident in the boy's gaze, in the defined contours of his features. Without a doubt, he was the son of David. And yet, Nathan had turned his back, departing and leaving David with an abundance of questions, but no answers in sight. He refused to allow it to conclude in such a manner. He had dedicated his existence to orchestrating results, making sure everything unfolded according to his desires. He needed to locate Nathan once more. He needed to grasp the situation. He extended his hand for the phone, dialing the number of the only person he trusted to provide assistance. Robert Vega, a private investigator whom he had relied on before. In just a few moments, Robert responded, his tone steady and composed. Mr. Whitman, how may I assist you today? David paused briefly before he began to speak. Please assist me in locating an individual. A youthful individual known as Nathan. I lack a surname. All I can say is that his mother was Elena Whitman. A moment of silence lingered before Robert's voice broke through once more. I'll explore my options. The following day, David immersed himself in his tasks, seeking to divert his mind from the turmoil brewing within. Gatherings, agreements, monetary statements. Everything had lost its former significance. After years of achievement, the burden of his success now seemed empty. He dedicated his life to accumulating riches, but to what end? What was the purpose if the one thing that genuinely counted had eluded his grasp? As the evening approached, his phone vibrated with a notification. It was indeed Robert. The investigator stated matter-of-factly, I found him. Nathan Whitman. At the age of 23. Resides in a cozy apartment in Queens, close to the serene Astoria Park. Employed at a garage located on Steinway Street. David let out a breath, his fingers clenching the edge of his desk. Please provide the address. Later that night, he sat in his car, the dim light of the street lamps casting shadows on the weathered facade of a dilapidated apartment building in Queens. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of Manhattan, the sort of environment he had never envisioned for his child's upbringing. The stairs creaked underfoot, their rusted metal telling tales of neglect, while the walls wore a tattered coat of peeling paint. He paused, the sound of his heartbeat echoing in his ears as he prepared to leave the confines of his car. He had navigated billion-dollar deals and confronted fierce competitors, yet as he stood before this door, ready to face his own son, he felt a level of anxiety that surpassed anything he had ever experienced. He rapped twice on the door. The door creaked ajar, unveiling Nathan's cautious expression. As soon as he laid eyes on David, his demeanor shifted to one of steely resolve. What on earth are you doing here? He questioned, his voice sharp. David inhaled deeply. I simply wish to engage in conversation. Nathan let out a derisive laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. It seems you persist, don't you? No, David confessed. Not when something is significant. For an extended pause, Nathan remained still. With a heavy sigh, he stepped aside, permitting David to enter. The apartment exuded a sense of intimacy, filled with an array of mismatched furniture and walls adorned with a tapestry of sketches and blueprints, each telling a story of creativity and inspiration. David's gaze shifted towards them, acknowledging the intricate mechanical designs. He inquired if you were an engineer. Nathan gave a slight shrug. Striving to be. Engaging in part-time studies at City College of New York. Putting in hours at the garage to cover the costs. David experienced yet another wave of remorse. While David had more money than he could ever spend, his son was diligently working to support his education. He took a moment to clear his throat. I didn't arrive with the intention of critiquing your existence. He paused, grappling with the elusive words he sought. I simply seek clarity. Why didn't she share that with me? Nathan folded his arms, resting against the counter with a thoughtful demeanor. She refused to be seen as someone in need of your pity. She understood that you had your realm, your responsibilities. She was reluctant to involve you in something that wasn't your decision. David felt a constriction in his chest. Yet, I would have made a different choice, he murmured, his voice scarcely audible. I would have been present. Nathan emitted a humorless chuckle. Could you? Or would you have penned a check and carried on? David tightened his jaw. He had never experienced such a profound sense of helplessness before. The past is unchangeable, Nathan. However, I am present at this moment. If you would permit me. Nathan observed him intently, his face betraying no emotion. With a heavy heart, he averted his gaze. I'm not sure if I can place my trust in you, he confessed. But I suppose time will tell. David experienced a glimmer of optimism. It was not an act of forgiveness. It wasn't acknowledgement. Yet, it marked the beginning. Universe. The stillness enveloped them, heavy with the burden of time they could never reclaim. David felt a strong urge to speak, to find the right words that could shatter the silence enveloping them, yet he struggled with the art of conveying his feelings. Corporate discussions and strategic dialogues. Those were his notable qualities. However, this was uncharted ground. Nathan, in contrast, appeared defensive, his arms folded tightly as he rested against the counter. His keen gaze scrutinized David, as if assessing his trustworthiness. David observed the sketches adorning the walls, detailed mechanical designs, blueprints, and engineering drafts. These were not mere random sketches. They were meticulous, exact, brimming with computations. He gestured towards one of them. "Did you create this?" he inquired with sincere curiosity. Nathan paused, contemplating, before finally giving a nod. "Indeed. It's for a project I've been developing at school." David moved in, scrutinizing the sketch with keen interest. "This is remarkable. Your skills are truly impressive." Nathan let out a derisive laugh. "Appreciate it, but skill alone won't cover the costs of education." David experienced yet another wave of remorse. While he indulged in a life of luxury, his son faced the daunting challenge of financing his college education, all the while remaining oblivious to his father's existence. He sought to mend the situation, yet he understood that merely throwing money at the issue wouldn't alter what had already transpired. "What is your objective?" David inquired, his tone measured and cautious. "What are your plans following graduation?" Nathan regarded him thoughtfully for a moment before responding. "I aspire to delve into automotive engineering, focusing on the design of more efficient engines, with the hope of launching my own company in the future." David nodded, a peculiar sense of pride swelling within him. "That's a well-thought-out plan. Have you considered exploring internship opportunities?" "Links." Nathan emitted a humorless chuckle. "Are there any connections? Finding time to study amidst my work shifts is a real challenge. Opportunities aren't exactly knocking at my door." David paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. He wished to extend a hand, yet he was mindful not to intrude. "If you ever seek direction, I have connections in the field. I might be able to place a couple of calls." Nathan's demeanor shifted to one of shadowed intensity. "I prefer to earn my own way." "It's not a gift," David stated with conviction. "It's assistance. The kind that a father ought to bestow upon his son." Nathan recoiled at the mention of father, and David instantly wished he had held back that word for a while longer. He understood that trust was not a foundation that could be laid in a single night. "Listen, I'm not trying to intrude on your life," David went on, "but I've already wasted so much time. I refuse to squander any opportunity that remains for me." Nathan let out a deep sigh, his hand moving wearily over his face. "It's more complex than that." David acknowledged this. "Perhaps we could begin with something modest. A culinary experience. A dialogue. Simply enjoying the process of discovering one another." Nathan paused, weighing his options, before ultimately giving a slight nod. "All right. A single meal. That's all there is to it." A wave of relief washed over David. It may have been modest, but it marked the beginning. The following evening, they gathered at a quaint diner close to Nathan's apartment. It was a stark contrast to the upscale venues David frequented, where the staff recognized him and champagne was always in abundance. As they sat facing one another, David came to the understanding that this setting was perfect for Nathan. It was genuine, straightforward, just like him. They placed their food orders, and for a moment, a quiet stillness enveloped them. Then gradually, Nathan began to speak, not delving into anything profoundly personal, but rather sharing insights about his work, his studies, and the subjects that ignited his passion. David tuned in, taking in each word with keen attention. It was their inaugural genuine exchange, and for the first time, David sensed a flicker of optimism that perhaps, just perhaps, he could carve out a space in Nathan's world. Upon completing their meal, David delved into his pocket and retrieved a business card. "I truly meant what I said about assisting you," he remarked, pushing it across the table. "Take your time. If you ever find yourself in need of guidance or a chance, feel free to reach out to me directly." Nathan paused, a moment of uncertainty flickering across his face as he accepted the card, tucking it into his wallet in silence. It wasn't a vow, yet it held significance. As they stepped outside, the cool night air enveloped them. Nathan buried his hands deep into his pockets. "This doesn't change a thing," he muttered. "Thank you for the lovely dinner." David gave a slight nod. "Progress unfolds gradually." Nathan regarded him intently for a moment before offering a subtle nod. Without uttering a single word, he pivoted and strode off into the distance. David observed him leave, a blend of feelings churning within him. He was uncertain of the destination this path would take him, yet for the first time in ages, a sense of purpose ignited within him, something truly worth striving for. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. David had always been a person who took initiative. Throughout his life, he made choices with a confidence that stemmed from a wealth of experience. He had grown used to wielding authority, to anticipating the unfolding events. Yet, in this fresh phase of his journey alongside Nathan, he sensed he was steering through unknown seas. Weeks had passed since their dinner at the diner, and although their conversations had dwindled, David felt an undeniable shift in the air, as if something was gradually transforming between them. Nathan had not reached out, yet he had not completely excluded David from his thoughts either. The stillness that enveloped them felt more like a shared understanding, a gentle agreement that they both respected. The peace was delicate, yet it was still peace, after all. David had exerted every effort to nurture their bond while ensuring Nathan felt comfortable and unpressured. He sent a handful of text messages, casually checking in from time to time, never pressing too much. Occasionally, Nathan would reply. The exchanges were concise yet courteous. Conversations remained surface level, focused solely on school and work updates, devoid of any suggestion of a deeper bond. Yet David held tightly to those subtle indications. He understood that it would require patience. He needed to demonstrate to Nathan that he was more than just another affluent individual attempting to purchase a place in his world. Nathan had explicitly stated during their initial conversation that he had no interest in charity, and David acknowledged that with respect. He had no intention of seeking Nathan's affection. He simply sought an opportunity to prove himself. On a Saturday afternoon, Nathan finally made contact. David's phone vibrated, and upon glancing at the name displayed, his heart raced with anticipation. Nathan reached out with a straightforward inquiry, "Are you available to grab a coffee?" David acted without a moment's pause. He responded in mere seconds, without a doubt. At what time and in which location? They decided to rendezvous at a cafe in Brooklyn, a spot Nathan claimed was among his top choices. It was a quaint little establishment on Court Street, tucked away between aged brick structures, the sort of venue where the barista recognized each patron by name. David arrived early, his heart racing with excitement. This was an opportunity, perhaps the first genuine one, to create something alongside his son. As Nathan entered the room, David couldn't help but observe the striking resemblance he bore to Elena. It wasn't merely his demeanor, it was the angle of his head and the glimmer in his eyes when he concentrated. For a brief instant, David struggled to contain the surge of emotions threatening to engulf him. Yet, he swiftly set those emotions aside. Nathan's presence was everything, and that was all that truly counted. They shared pleasantries as Nathan guided David to a cozy corner table by the window. The location was serene, offering a glimpse of the lively street beyond, where the vibrant energy of Brooklyn's midday scene unfolded in the backdrop. Nathan requested a black coffee, reminiscent of how his mother preferred hers, and David mirrored his choice. They settled into their seats, and for the first time in weeks, David sensed the heaviness of the silence between them lift slightly. Nathan started to disrupt the silence, sharing that he had been reflecting deeply on what you mentioned that evening. David nodded, feeling uncertain about the direction of this dialogue. Which section? So, you're interested in getting to know me better and being a part of my life? Nathan remarked, lifting his cup to his lips for a taste of his coffee. I suppose I've been a bit unkind about it, haven't I? David could hardly trust what he was hearing. Nathan expressed his regrets. That took him by surprise. No, you haven't been unkind, David said, his voice steady. Your honesty has been commendable. I hold that in high regard. Nathan gazed into his cup, his fingers rhythmically drumming against the ceramic surface. I'm not quite sure how to interpret everything that's happening. I have dedicated my entire existence to believing that I was the only one experiencing this. So, you're saying you've been out there all along, experiencing an entirely different existence. David sensed the gravity of those words settle within him. He had never grasped the weight of his absence on Nathan, but now, as he listened and witnessed the pain in his eyes, he felt the full magnitude of what he had overlooked. What happened, Nathan, is beyond my control. Yet, I find myself present in this moment. If you would allow me to. Nathan took his time before replying. He appeared deep in contemplation, his eyes wandering to the street beyond. I don't know if I can simply forget everything, he murmured softly. I have constructed my existence in your absence. I've come to depend on my own strength, and opening up to someone isn't a simple task. David grasped the concept. He had constructed his existence on accomplishments and possessions, yet none of it held significance now. Nothing could ever fill the void of the bond he had never formed with his son. I'm not requesting that you erase it from your memory. I'm seeking an opportunity to become a part of your world. Free from obligations, devoid of anticipations. Simply, we are navigating this journey side by side. Nathan locked eyes with him, a gentle warmth spreading across his features for the first time. I'm still really frustrated about many things. A detailed account of how events unfolded. Yet, I find myself intrigued. Well, I suppose that's something to consider, isn't it? David smiled, experiencing a wave of relief he hadn't known he was holding on to. That suffices perfectly for my needs. For the next hour, they engaged in conversation. Gradually, the barriers started to crumble. They delved into a myriad of topics, from school to Nathan's aspirations, even reflecting on the initial awkwardness of their first encounter. David shared details of his work and life with Nathan, yet he prioritized listening over speaking. He understood that this extended beyond his own concerns. This narrative revolves around Nathan and the moments that had slipped away from them. As they prepared to depart, Nathan caught him off guard. You know, he said, perhaps we could revisit this. Let's grab a coffee and have a chat. I'm not sure about being a, but he paused and then suggested, perhaps we could give it a shot. One step at a time, isn't that so? David felt a surge of optimism, and for the first time, he embraced the possibility of hope. It may not have been significant, but it held its own value. It marked the start of something new. Before moving on to the next part, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. David noticed he was glancing at his phone with increasing frequency, anticipating a message that may never arrive. Since their encounter at the cafe, he sensed a transformation in the atmosphere, a new perspective in Nathan's gaze towards him. It wasn't an open door just yet, but at least it was no longer locked. Several days went by, and even though Nathan had not made any further contact, David felt it was best not to press him. He understood that this would require a great deal of patience, a quality he possessed in abundance in his professional endeavors, yet had seldom needed in his personal affairs. As dusk settled over the city, he found himself in his penthouse, gazing at the sprawling New York skyline when suddenly, his phone vibrated. He snatched it up swiftly, a thrill coursing through him at the sight of Nathan's name. The message was straightforward. "Hey, are you busy?" David replied without delay. "Not in the slightest." "Hello there." Nathan paused for a moment before crafting his response. Lost in thought. "Are you available to chat?" David experienced a wave of relief wash over him. Perhaps, just perhaps, this signifies advancement. "Absolutely. Feel free to reach out at your convenience." In the next instant, his phone began to ring. David picked up on the first ring. "Hello, Nathan." A moment of quiet lingered on the line before Nathan let out a breath, as though he had been weighing the decision to make the call. At last, he spoke. "Therefore, I suppose I had a question for you." "Proceed," David remarked, maintaining an even tone. "I was pondering about my mother," Nathan said with a hint of uncertainty. "I remember you shared a glimpse of how you met her, but I haven't had the chance to hear your perspective on the whole story." David sensed a constriction in his chest. After years of attempting to erase the past, he found himself confronted with Nathan on the line, awakening a desire to recall what he had tried so hard to forget. He said slowly, choosing his words with great care, "Your mother was incredible. Our paths crossed during our college days in Boston. She immersed herself in journalism while I found myself overwhelmed by finance classes. I became so immersed in my ambitions that I hardly paid attention to the life unfolding around me. However, your mother ensured that people took notice of her, not through volume, but due to the captivating energy she exuded. She had a remarkable ability to enter a room and instantly create a sense of belonging for everyone present." Nathan paused briefly before responding, "That certainly sounds like her." David smiled, yet a hint of sorrow lingered beneath the surface. She possessed a unique ability to expand the dimensions of existence, making it seem grander than it truly was. She had faith in ideas and individuals. She often expressed that true success transcended mere financial gain, it was fundamentally about creating an impact. At that time, I was too youthful and too absorbed in my aspirations to truly grasp the depth of her words. "What transpired?" Nathan inquired, his tone now gentler. David let out a weary sigh, his fingers running through his hair in a moment of frustration. "Immediately following my graduation, I received a job offer in New York. It was all I had ever dreamed of. An opportunity at a leading company, a swift route to achievement. Your mother wished to extend her stay in Boston to complete an internship that truly inspired her. We vowed to make the long-distance relationship succeed, but I was youthful and self-centered. I prioritized my professional journey above all else." Prior to her arrival, Nathan remained silent for a moment, and David began to fret that he had perhaps overstepped his bounds. Yet again, Nathan's voice broke the silence. He confessed that she rarely mentioned you. "I always had an idea of who you were, but she didn't share much about the events that transpired. I suppose I always thought you simply departed and never glanced back." David forced down the knot in his throat. "I never wanted to say goodbye to her, Nathan. At that moment, I believed I was making the correct choice. I promised myself I would return for her, that once I had established my path, we could resume from where we had paused. Yet, existence doesn't unfold in such a manner. As time progresses, it became clear to me just how much I had lost by the moment she slipped away." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Indeed," he murmured softly. "She had vanished." David sensed the gravity of those words. "I regret it, Nathan. Each and every day." Another silence lingered between them, yet it felt less charged than before. The silence enveloped them, a profound moment where two souls truly connected and grasped one another's essence. At last, Nathan broke the silence once more. He confessed that he was curious to learn more. "It's more than just her. Concerning you. Concerning all matters." David felt an overwhelming surge of emotion. He expressed his desire with genuine sincerity. Nathan paused for a moment before saying, but it must be on my terms. Just take it easy, without any burdens or demands. Naturally, David consented. Take your time, I'm here when you are. A brief silence lingered before Nathan uttered a remark that took David by surprise. Do you believe she would have wished for us to connect? David felt a constriction in his throat. I understand she would, he remarked, his voice heavy with feeling. Your mother always had faith in new beginnings. Nathan remained silent for a moment, but when he finally found his words, his voice was soft, carrying a hint of contemplation. Perhaps we could reconvene in the near future. Simply to converse. David experienced a surge of optimism, an emotion he had long denied himself. That sounds lovely, he replied with a gentle smile. As the call concluded, David leaned back, gazing out at the twinkling city lights. After a long time, he sensed a change stirring within him. He had dedicated so much time to fleeing from his history, from his errors, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to set things straight. Before moving on, please subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. David reached the quaint cafe in Brooklyn ahead of schedule, the place where he and Nathan had planned to gather. He selected a table by the window, his hands intertwined as he sought to calm his anxious thoughts. Years had passed since he experienced such a profound sense of anticipation, a blend of hope and anxiety swirling within him. The initial meeting exceeded his expectations, yet the true test lay ahead, demonstrating to Nathan his genuine commitment to being part of his life. The doorbell rang, and David glanced up to find Nathan entering, his stance a bit rigid, yet his stride was unwavering. That in itself provided David with a sense of comfort. Nathan noticed him and approached, effortlessly taking the seat opposite without uttering a single word. Thanks for coming, David said cautiously, examining his son's expression for any hint of his emotions. Nathan shrugged, thinking it might be worth a conversation. David nodded, choosing to hold back a bit. A waitress approached, and they each placed their order for coffee. A brief pause lingered in the air before Nathan broke the stillness with his words. What is it that you actually do? The inquiry took David by surprise, yet he embraced it with open arms. I operate an investment firm. We oversee portfolios, assist in business development, and similar endeavors. Nathan wore a subtle smirk. In essence, you contribute to the wealth of the affluent. David let out a soft laugh, savoring the subtle wit. That's certainly a perspective. Nathan savored a sip of his coffee. I lack knowledge in the realm of finance. My mother had a passion for crafting words, and I suppose that influence has shaped me. I am pursuing a degree in journalism at NYU. David's eyes grew large with surprise. Reporting? That's truly remarkable. Your mother would undoubtedly feel immense pride. Nathan adjusted his position in the chair. I'm not sure about my skills, but I truly enjoy it. David noted that getting into NYU must mean you have some talent. Nathan paused for a moment before confessing, I actually received a scholarship. My mother always encouraged me to pursue my passions, yet the cost of college was a significant concern. I put in the effort to achieve it. David experienced a sharp twinge of remorse. He possessed an abundance of wealth, more than he could ever utilize, while his own son faced challenges in completing his college education. I had no idea, he murmured, his voice now softer. Certainly you didn't, Nathan remarked, his tone devoid of anger, merely conveying a straightforward observation. David let out a breath, coming to terms with all that he had overlooked. I understand that the past is unchangeable, Nathan, but I desire to be included in your future. If you would permit me. Nathan sat in silence, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup, as though it contained the solutions he sought. He confessed that he was unsure of what that entailed. Neither do I, David admitted sincerely. However, we can find a solution. Free from pressure and devoid of expectations. Simply, one dialogue at a moment. Nathan raised his gaze to meet his, and in that moment, David sensed a shift, as if he were finally perceiving something beyond mere barriers. "All right," Nathan finally replied. "Engage in one dialogue at a moment." David beamed, a comforting sensation enveloping him that he hadn't experienced in ages. They engaged in conversation for more than an hour following that. Concerning the little details. Films that captured their interest, the literature Nathan was engrossed in, David's absurdly hectic work timetable. The journey was fraught with challenges, and there were instances when Nathan appeared reluctant, as though he feared the vulnerability that comes with lowering his defenses. Yet David remained unfazed. He understood that this would not be straightforward. Connections are not forged overnight. Upon exiting the cafe, Nathan buried his hands deep within the confines of his jacket pockets. "It's time for me to head out. I have a paper that needs to be submitted by tomorrow." David gave a slight nod. "Absolutely. Perhaps we could revisit this experience in the future." Nathan paused for just a moment before giving a nod. "Absolutely, that sounds appealing." David felt a surge of joy. "Same here." Nathan offered a brief nod before disappearing into the bustling streets of Brooklyn, leaving David standing there, a sense of something he hadn't experienced in years, hope, washing over him. In the days that ensued, David couldn't shake the persistent thoughts of Nathan from his mind. Their exchange at the cafe unfolded more favorably than he had anticipated, yet he understood it was merely the start of a lengthy journey ahead. He was cautious not to exert too much pressure, yet he was equally mindful of the need to avoid letting too much time slip by between their encounters. He had already lost 20 years of his son's life, he wasn't going to allow any more to pass him by. After a couple of days, he reached out to Nathan with a message. It was straightforward. "I trust your paper turned out well. Feel free to reach out if you're ever in the mood for coffee again." He hadn't anticipated a swift reply, yet to his astonishment, his phone vibrated just minutes later. It went well enough. "A cup of coffee sounds delightful. Perhaps this weekend?" David experienced a wave of relief and swiftly responded with a message. "That sounds absolutely ideal. Inform me of the time and place." They reconvened at a new cafe in Manhattan, this time situated nearer to Nathan's campus. Nathan appeared somewhat more at ease this time, yet there remained a hint of caution in his demeanor. Once more, they engaged in conversation about the little things. David inquired about Nathan's classes, and in response, Nathan posed several questions regarding David's work. It may not have been the quintessential father-son bonding experience, yet it held significance, and David felt a sense of gratitude for it. As they lingered in the cafe, Nathan paused, a moment of uncertainty washing over him before he finally inquired, "Why did you and my mom part ways?" It was the inaugural moment he had inquired about something intimate, something that delved deeper than the superficial, and David understood he needed to respond with sincerity. He let out a deep breath, his fingers raking through his hair. "We were just kids," he confessed. "I encountered her at the beginning of my professional journey. She radiated brilliance, intelligence, fervor, and vitality. However, I became engrossed in my tasks. I continually assured her that life would ease up, that I'd carve out more moments for us, yet it never came to fruition. Ultimately, she grew weary of the anticipation." Nathan paused, his voice low, then inquired, "Have you ever attempted to seek her out?" David felt a constriction in his throat. "I certainly did. Some time after our separation, it dawned on me just how significant my losses were. However, by that time, she had already relocated to Chicago. I had no idea she was expecting, Nathan." He hesitated, his words faltering as he grappled with how to complete the thought. Nathan gazed into his coffee, contemplating this. He confessed that she rarely spoke of you. "I was aware of your name, yet she never portrayed you as the villain. Merely an absence, a presence unfulfilled." David forced down the knot that had formed in his throat. "Every day," he murmured, "I feel the weight of that regret. I could have accomplished so much more." I ought to have put up a stronger fight to remain a part of her world. Had I been aware of your existence, he shook his head. I understand that forgiveness may not come easily, Nathan, but I want you to know that if I had the power to alter the past, I certainly would. Nathan gazed at him for an extended moment, then let out a breath. He confessed, I'm at a loss with all of this. There's no need for you to take any action, David remarked. We approach it gradually, focusing on each step as it comes. Take your time. Nathan inclined his head with deliberation. Understood. They lingered in quietude for a time, yet the stillness held no discomfort. It seemed like advancement. As they exited the cafe, David strolled alongside Nathan for a few blocks before they bid each other farewell. Just as Nathan was about to leave, he paused and then remarked, Hey, I appreciate you getting in touch. David beamed with delight. I appreciate the opportunity you've provided me. As he observed Nathan fade into the throng, David sensed a transformation stirring within him. After a long time, he finally sensed progress, no longer dwelling on the past. He faced a lengthy journey ahead, but at least he was no longer traversing that path in solitude. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. David struggled to recall the last occasion when he experienced such a wave of anxiety over anything besides his job. In recent weeks, he and Nathan had gathered a few more times, with each encounter becoming slightly less strained and increasingly effortless. They weren't quite there yet, but at least the barrier Nathan had erected was starting to show signs of weakness. Today, however, felt distinct. Today, David extended an invitation to Nathan, welcoming him to his home for the very first time. It wasn't an elaborate invitation, merely dinner, something straightforward, yet it felt significant. He devoted the whole day to preparation, ensuring that every detail was flawless. Though he lacked culinary skills, he had taken the initiative to hire a chef for the evening, aiming to impress without veering into ostentation. As the doorbell chimed, he inhaled deeply, gathering his thoughts before he turned the handle. Nathan stood there, an air of unease about him, yet he didn't seem ready to retreat. He donned a relaxed hoodie and jeans, a sharp departure from David's neatly pressed shirt and slacks, yet David remained unfazed. He felt a deep sense of gratitude that Nathan had arrived. Hey, David said, moving aside to allow him entry. Nathan stepped inside, his eyes sweeping across the contemporary yet inviting penthouse that offered a stunning view of Central Park. This place is nice, he said, and David could sense the unspoken truth beneath it all, this place is enormous. David beamed with delight. Thank you, please feel free to make yourself comfortable. Nathan ventured deeper, taking in the artwork adorning the walls, the luxurious furnishings, and the gleaming floors beneath his feet. So this is what investment firms offer, huh? He mused, a slight smirk playing on his lips. David let out a soft laugh. Perhaps something along those lines. Yet, truthfully, all of this holds little significance if there isn't someone to share it with. He hadn't intended for the remark to carry weight, yet Nathan appeared to sense it regardless. Well, here I am now, Nathan said, his tone playful yet his words carrying weight. David felt a subtle constriction in his chest. I certainly do. They transitioned to the dining room, where the table awaited, adorned with a stunningly arranged spread of food. Nathan arched an eyebrow. Did you create all of this? David chuckled. I long for that. Assistance was provided. Nathan wore a sly grin. Statistics. As they dined, the dialogue unfolded with a fluidity that surprised David. Conversations flowed around Nathan's courses, the literary works he cherished, and his aspirations post-graduation. David recounted tales from his college days, anecdotes that brought laughter to Nathan, resembling little triumphs. As dessert came to a close, Nathan reclined in his chair, fixing a serious gaze on David. What do we do next? He inquired. David placed his fork on the table, fully understanding Nathan's implication. "It's your choice," he stated with sincerity. "I respect your readiness and won't pressure you into anything you're not prepared for." Nathan paused, his gaze fixed on his plate for a brief moment before lifting his eyes. "I find myself uncertain about navigating this whole father-son dynamic. I've never truly had a father figure in my life. It was only my mother and I." David forced down the knot in his throat. "There's no need to hurry with anything. We can simply exist in each other's lives in whatever manner feels appropriate." Nathan let out a breath. "I believe that would be enjoyable." David smiled, a wave of relief sweeping over him. "Same here." Nathan surveyed the apartment once more. "I often found myself pondering the essence of my father's character. If he were merely a slacker or if he simply lacked concern." He cast a glance over his shoulder at David. "However, you don't quite match my expectations." David paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. "What were your expectations?" Nathan wore a sly grin. "An elderly affluent gentleman lacking in charisma." David chuckled heartily. "While I may be wealthy, I like to believe I possess a certain charm as well." Nathan let out a soft laugh. "Indeed, you're doing just fine." It may not have been a sweeping proclamation of affection, yet it held its own significance. At this moment, that was more than sufficient. Before moving on, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. David discovered he was settling into a fresh cadence in his existence. A scenario that incorporated Nathan in ways he had never envisioned just months prior. Their gatherings had increased in frequency, transforming from sporadic coffee dates to dinners, strolls through Central Park, and even a handful of Knicks games. Every exchange gradually eroded the unseen wall that had stood between them, and although there remained instances of uncertainty, David sensed their connection deepening. It was an unusual sensation, embracing fatherhood later in life, yet he treasured each moment shared with Nathan. However, a persistent unease shadowed his thoughts, a concern that a single misstep could cause Nathan to withdraw once more. He preferred to tread lightly, avoiding any pressure or excessive demands, allowing Nathan to set the rhythm of their interactions. One evening, while they were seated in a cozy diner close to Nathan's campus, he introduced an unexpected topic of conversation. He mused about the idea of visiting Chicago, absently stirring his milkshake. David lifted his gaze from the food before him. "Is there a specific reason for that?" Nathan paused briefly, letting out a sigh. "I wish to pay a visit to my mother's resting place." His voice maintained a calm facade, yet an unspoken tension lingered beneath the surface. "I haven't gone back since the funeral. It seems to me that the moment has arrived." David experienced a wave of melancholy at the thought of Olivia. He had devoted countless hours to creating something with Nathan, yet he hadn't paused to consider the depth of his son's ongoing grief. "That's a wonderful idea," David remarked softly. "If you'd like, I can accompany you." Nathan looked at him in astonishment. "Would you really consider that?" David gave a slight nod. "Absolutely. If you prefer to venture out solo, I completely understand. However, if you desire some company, it would be a privilege to accompany you." Nathan paused in silence for a brief moment before offering a subtle nod. "Absolutely, that sounds appealing." A few days later, they took a flight to Chicago, a city rich with history for Nathan, yet holding little significance for David. The flight passed in silence, each of them absorbed in their own reflections. Upon their arrival, Nathan led David to the cemetery where Olivia lay at rest. The air was sharp, the sky a blanket of gray as they strolled among the lines of gravestones until they arrived at hers. Nathan lingered by the grave, his hands tucked into his pockets, gazing at the etched letters of his mother's name. "Hey Mom," he said softly, his voice just a breath above silence. David took a step back, allowing Nathan some space to gather his thoughts. He observed his son kneeling, gently running his fingers along the inscription. "I'm managing just fine," Nathan replied gently. I appreciate your concern, but I'm working through everything on my own. College offers valuable experiences. I've formed a few connections. I encountered my father. His voice trembled just a bit. Initially, I was uncertain about my feelings, but he turned out to be different from my expectations. He's making an effort, Mom. I believe you would be fine with that. David felt a tightness in his chest at those words. He had endured a heavy burden, weighed down by the remorse of not being present for Olivia, of remaining unaware of Nathan, of losing out on so much. Listening to Nathan express that Olivia would have accepted his presence in Nathan's life felt like a subtle glimpse of redemption. Nathan rose after some time, letting out a deep breath. He glanced at David, his demeanor more gentle than it had been previously. I appreciate you joining me on this journey. David rested a hand on his shoulder. Without fail. They departed the cemetery quietly, yet the stillness held no discomfort. The silence enveloped them, rich with unspoken words, a shared understanding lingering in the air. As they settled into the car, Nathan glanced at David, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Are you feeling hungry? There's a pizza spot my mom used to bring me to during my childhood. The finest deep dish in the city. David smiled broadly. That sounds ideal. As they navigated the streets of Chicago, an unmistakable sense of change lingered in the air. It wasn't merely the city or the moment, it was the essence of their connection. The barriers that had loomed large between them were now crumbling, and for the first time, David sensed the genuine presence of his son in his life. David could never have foreseen the unexpected twists that life had in store for him. Transitioning from a self-made millionaire who thought he had it all, to discovering the existence of a son he never knew, the last few months have been an emotional roller coaster. As he sat in his office, gazing at the New York skyline, a sensation washed over him that had eluded him for years: contentment. Nathan had woven himself into the fabric of his life, and despite their rocky beginnings, they had crafted something genuine. It transcended the mere act of reclaiming what was lost, it became a journey of collective progress. The journey to Chicago transformed their connection, strengthening their bond in an unforeseen manner. David had feared that returning to Olivia's grave could stir up past pain, but rather, it provided them both with a sense of resolution. Nathan had at last permitted himself to release some of the burdens he had been shouldering, and in that release, he had created space for David in his life. Nathan had recently wrapped up his semester, and David had extended an invitation for dinner at his apartment in Manhattan. A new tradition had taken shape: Nathan would arrive, and together they would embark on culinary adventures, or at least try to, given their lack of expertise in the kitchen. Their conversations would meander through a wide array of topics, from sports to business, and delve into Nathan's aspirations for the future. That evening, as Nathan diced vegetables and David simmered a pot of pasta sauce, Nathan abruptly faced him, his expression turning serious. He mentioned that he had been pondering. I am eager to secure an internship at your company this summer. David was caught off guard. Is that so? He inquired, making an effort to suppress the thrill in his tone. He had been wishing for Nathan to show some curiosity about his business, yet he was reluctant to pressure him into any decisions. Nathan gave a slight nod. Absolutely, I'm pursuing a degree in business, and gaining practical experience is essential. I'm eager to witness your process firsthand. David placed the spoon aside and turned his gaze toward his son. I believe that's an excellent suggestion, but to be clear, you'll need to put in the same effort as everyone else. There will be no preferential treatment. Nathan wore a sly grin. I anticipated nothing different. That evening's dinner had an unusual quality to it. Freer, as though they had at last arrived at a moment where their connection was no longer burdened by previous shadows. They shared laughter and stories, and for the first time, David sensed that he wasn't merely compensating for lost moments, he was genuinely embracing the role of a father. A couple of weeks down the line, Nathan embarked on his internship at David's company. Initially, a few employees murmured about the CEO's son being part of their team, but Nathan swiftly demonstrated that he was not merely a figurehead in the workplace. He arrived ahead of schedule, lingered until the end, and posed insightful inquiries. He sought to gain knowledge not only from David but from all those in his vicinity. David was filled with immense pride. As the sun dipped below the horizon, signaling the end of a long day at the office, Nathan approached David's door and knocked softly. "Do you have a moment to spare?" he inquired. David gestured for him to take a seat. "What thoughts are swirling in your head?" Nathan paused briefly before he began to speak. "I'm aware that events unfolded differently than we had anticipated in our relationship. I spent my childhood believing I was without a father, and then, out of nowhere, you appeared. Initially, I held a grudge against it. I held a grudge against you. However, at this moment, I'm thrilled to have discovered you." He took a moment, inhaling deeply. "Perhaps I'm thankful that you discovered me." David sensed a constriction in his throat. He had devoted countless hours to feeling remorseful for his absence during Nathan's formative years, yet those words illuminated the truth: the present was what truly held significance. "I'm glad as well," he replied, his voice unwavering. "I might not have been present for the initial 18 years, but I am here now. I'm here to stay." Nathan offered a faint smile. "Excellent. I believe I may genuinely enjoy your company." David let out a soft laugh. What a comforting thought. That summer marked the pinnacle of David's existence. They collaborated, enjoyed weekends watching baseball games, and even embarked on a spontaneous trip to California just for the fun of it. Nathan transformed from an unfamiliar face into a cherished member of the family, and for the first time in ages, David sensed a profound sense of fulfillment in his life. Years later, when Nathan graduated and officially became a full-time member of David's company, David realized he had not just gained a son, but also a lasting legacy. Nathan represented more than mere lineage. He embodied the pinnacle of his accomplishments, a testament to the notion that life can surprise you with unexpected opportunities for redemption. This time, David was resolute in his commitment to seize every moment.